Coming up on this Thursday edition of Daybreak, the search for fugitive businessman Yoo Byung-eun, wanted for his involvement in April's Sewol-ho ferry disaster, goes on after a massive raid on his compound turns up no major leads. A sweeping reshuffle of the cabinet and presidential office is expected any day now as President Park Geun-hye prepares to launch her reform drive proposed in the wake of the recent ferry disaster. Plus, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe reportedly says he's willing to travel to North Korea to help settle the issue of abducted Japanese citizens. Daybreak begins now. Hello and thanks for joining us. To our viewers around the world, it's 6 a.m. on Thursday, June 12th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom and you are tuned in to Daybreak. Our top story this morning, prosecutors mobilized thousands of police officers on Wednesday to raid a religious compound in a bid to arrest key aides of Yoo Byung-eun, the de facto owner of the sunken Sewol-ho ferry. However, with the raid failing to find anything or anyone of significance, prosecutors still have no solid lead on Mr. Yoo's whereabouts. Yoo Li-an reports.
Some 6,000 police have raided a religious compound in Anseong, south of Seoul, to arrest two women suspected of helping the fugitive de facto owner of the Sewol-ho ferry, Yoo Byung-eun, evade authorities. They have yet to find the two women, but they did arrest other church followers suspected of playing a key role in aiding and abetting the fugitive ferry owner. Yoo is a founding member of the Salvation Sect religious group, which is believed to have acted as the control tower for his escape. The massive operation comes less than 24 hours after President Park Geun-hye lashed out against the joint investigation team for taking too long to find Yoo.
지금까지의 검거 방식을 재점검하고 다른 추가적인 방법은 없는지 모든 수단과 방법을 검토해서 반드시 법의 심판을 받도록 해야 할 것입니다.
The Sewol-ho ferry owner has not been spotted in public since the tragic disaster occurred in April. Prosecutors say he has previously attempted to smuggle himself out of the country by offering to pay brokers a whopping 10 billion won, or roughly $10 million. Hours after President Park's comments a day earlier, prosecutors held an emergency meeting with police, military, and government officials and decided to have the Navy watch over the coast surrounding Korea to prevent the fugitive from fleeing the country. This is the first time that the Navy has been called on to take part in an operation designed specifically to prevent someone from being smuggled out of the nation. Yoo Li-an, Arirang News.
Now, the entire nation was appalled by the captain and crew of the Sewol-ho ferry for being among the first to escape the sinking ship, leaving hundreds of others, mostly school children, to die. Now, with their trial underway, our Connie Kim takes a look at what the prosecution has to do to prove a handful of the most senior crew members, including the captain, were guilty of murder by willful negligence.
The biggest issue in the trial is whether 4 senior crew members, including the captain, will be found guilty of murder by willful negligence for abandoning the ferry prematurely and leaving hundreds of passengers to die. On the first day of the trial, state prosecutors accused the 4 of killing some 300 passengers by failing to make every effort to rescue them. Apart from the murder charge, the 4 were also charged with negligence that led to the sinking of the vessel and caused great casualty. The 11 other crew members were similarly charged. The senior crew members argued it was the Coast Guard's responsibility to rescue passengers. Captain Lee Jun-suk's lawyer asserted that it was unjust to hold Lee responsible for what he could not do when he had taken steps to protect the vessel while he awaited the arrival of the Coast Guard. A court official quoted the captain as saying that he asked passengers to get off the ferry before he abandoned the vessel himself. Another lawyer defending the first mate said crew members requested emergency help from the Coast Guard and thought it would be best to evacuate passengers when rescue experts arrived. For the murder charges to be upheld, prosecutors will need to overcome a number of challenges. They need to prove the crew members did not make efforts to rescue passengers even though they knew those on board would die. The prosecution also needs to prove the direct link between the acts of the crew and the death of the passengers. The next session is scheduled for next Tuesday, and the verdict is expected no later than November. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
The Korean government has so far spent about $82 million dealing with the aftermath of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. The finance ministry says the total is separate from the amount of money earmarked for boosting the economy in the wake of the tragedy. By sector, the defense ministry has spent the most at $26 million. This money has been used for search operation equipment at the accident site and the provision of boats, planes and manpower. The education ministry has spent more than $10.5 million. Money that was used on funerals and psychological treatment for the families of the victims. In other news now, and a cabinet reshuffle is in the works after President Park Geun-hye's nomination of a new prime minister this week. Some political watchers say new appointments will be made before the week is up, as the president is leaving the country for a while next week. Our Choi Sun has this report.
Contrary to earlier predictions, President Park is expected to carry out reshuffles of her cabinet and the presidential office before departing for Central Asia next Monday. That seems to be the consensus, as the swift move would be made to avoid a further delay in government restructuring and public service reforms, which the president promised in the aftermath of April's ferry disaster. On Wednesday, her spokesperson Min Kyung-wook said there was a possibility that changes could take place this week. Under normal circumstances, the president would wait for the prime minister nominee to be confirmed by the National Assembly at the end of this month or the start of next before making such a wide-scale change. But since the president cannot afford to waste any more time, her nominee Moon Chang-guk will likely take part in the process of choosing new cabinet ministers, while current Prime Minister Chung Hong-won would make the official recommendations. The speculation is that the nation's finance minister, who also acts as the deputy prime minister, will likely be replaced by the president's close aide and former ruling party floor leader Choi Kyung-hwan. Another potential candidate is current Presidential Economic Affairs Secretary Cho Won-dong. The ministers of Security and Education, both of whom came under fire for inconsiderate behavior after the ferry accident, may get the axe. It's speculated that someone from academia could take on the role of education minister, who will also sit as the second deputy prime minister. A number of President Park's senior secretaries, including ones in charge of the economy, culture, and political affairs, may either be named into the cabinet or given a different post. Meanwhile, her chief of staff and senior secretary for state planning are widely expected to stay put for now. Choi Yoo-sun, Arirang News.
We start before the sun rises to bring you the latest stories out of Korea. We also lead the way with important global coverage. Stay on the pulse of what is happening with Daybreak.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has reportedly expressed a willingness to visit North Korea to help settle the issue of abducted Japanese citizens. Japan's Kyodo News Agency reported Wednesday that Furuya Keiji, the Minister of State for the abduction issue, said Abe has said he could hold talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang on this issue. The minister did not elaborate on when or where Abe made the comment. Early this month, Japanese Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida said it was important to think about how to bring the abductees home and that Tokyo would review a potential visit to the north. North Korea recently agreed to reinvestigate the fate of the missing Japanese nationals in exchange for Tokyo loosening some sanctions. North Korea admitted in 2002 that it had abducted 13 Japanese nationals in the late 1970s and early 80s, but Japan claims many more were kidnapped. Now, international efforts to restart the long-stalled multi-nation talks on North Korea's denuclearization appear to be making some headway. The chief nuclear envoys from South Korea and China have been meeting in Beijing this week, while in Washington, officials from Japan and the US have been sitting down for talks. Hwang Sang-hee has the details.
As Chinese President Xi Jinping readies for his visit to South Korea next month, Seoul's chief nuclear envoy Hwang Jung-guk and his Chinese counterpart Woo Da-wei met Tuesday in Beijing to discuss a resumption of the long-stalled six-party nuclear talks. Speaking to reporters on the condition of anonymity, a high-ranking South Korean official said Seoul, Washington, and Beijing share the same view on the need to prevent Pyongyang from further development of its nuclear capacity. The six-party talks, aimed at ending Pyongyang's nuclear program, involve the two Koreas, the United States, China, Japan, and Russia, but have been at a standstill for more than 5 years. China, as North Korea's biggest ally, has pushed for an early resumption of the talks, while South Korea, the United States, and Japan have said the North must take practical steps to denuclearize before they will return to the negotiating table. But this trilateral cooperation has recently been called in question following Japan's individual dialogue with North Korea. Speaking with his U.S. counterpart Glenn Davies in Washington on Tuesday local time, Japanese chief nuclear envoy Junichi Ihara explained Tokyo's agreement with Pyongyang, which centers on reinvestigating the fate of Japanese abductees to the north. According to the Kyodo news agency, Ihara stressed the importance of the trilateral alliance in countering North Korea's nuclear ambitions, but said that the abduction issue required separate discussions. And as North Korea accelerates diplomacy of its own, experts say South Korea should make use of the Chinese leader's upcoming visit as an opportunity to outline what it wants from Pyongyang in exchange for restarting dialogue. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye has called on overseas members of her Unification Advisory Council to spur international efforts to improve the livelihoods of ordinary North Koreans. This, she said, would help the two Koreas take a step closer to reunification. At a meeting with hundreds of advisors on Wednesday, the South Korean president referred to a three-point proposal she made to Pyongyang during a trip to Germany in March. In it, she suggested the two Koreas first resolve the North's humanitarian issues, jointly build infrastructure, and expand social and cultural exchanges to better prepare for a unified Korea. President Park then vowed to continue persuading the North to give up its nuclear ambitions to bring peace and freedom to the Korean peninsula. Now, South Korea plans to spend $1 billion for the deployment of 5 reconnaissance satellites by the year 2020. Under the chairmanship of Defense Minister Kim Kwon-jin, the Defense Acquisition Program Administration said on Wednesday that the Agency for Defense Development will lead the research and development for these spy satellites. The satellites will be used to monitor North Korea and its nuclear test sites. The administration also plans to boost R&D in long-range surface-to-air missiles from next year. Back here in South Korea, and a scheduled one-day strike of more than 3,000 gas stations in the country that was set for today has been put on hold for the time being at least. The Korea Oil Station Association said that while it has failed to reach an agreement with the government over a new rule that requires gas stations to file weekly reports on their purchase and sale of petroleum products, it will push the strike back by about 10 days to hold further negotiations. The government says this new weekly filing rule will help root out illegal practices. The association wants its members, which make up 1/4 of all gas stations in Korea, to be given a 2-year grace period prior to the implementation. The government, however, has said that it will only allow a 6-month probation period before imposing fines for non-compliance. Korea's job creation has slowed for the 3rd straight month in May, and the Finance Ministry is attributing this slowdown to the Sewol-ho ferry disaster back in April. Hwang Ji-hye has this report.
The Korean economy added 410,000 jobs in May from a year ago, bringing the number of employed in the nation to almost 26 million. But that marks 3 straight months of slowing job growth and the lowest gain since last July. Statistics Korea says slumping private consumption due to the deadly ferry disaster in April resulted in the lower growth in employment last month. It's no surprise then that the nation's service industry, which includes the retail, lodging, and restaurant sectors, added only around 320,000 jobs in May from a year earlier, far lower than more than 500,000 created in the previous month. Job creation in the leisure activities sector even dropped by 17,000. The statistics agency said earlier that service sector production had dropped 1% from the previous month, while retail sales were down more than 1.5%. That, the agency said, is a reflection of the lackluster domestic demand brought on by the disaster. While the government has cautioned that slowing consumer spending caused by the ferry tragedy could hurt the nation's economic recovery, the finance ministry says it's not considering an extra budget to further stimulate the economy. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following on this Thursday morning. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim, standing by at the news center. Good morning, Eunice.
Good morning, Mark. We begin in Iraq this morning, where it appears al-Qaeda-inspired militants have effectively conquered the northern city of Tikrit, with fighting moved to the outskirts just one day after taking Mosul, the country's second largest city. Several hundred suspected ISIL militants bombarded the capital of Salahuddin province and the hometown of former leader Saddam Hussein, setting police stations on fire and taking over a military base, according to eyewitnesses and police reports. The militants also overran the Turkish consulate in Mosul and are holding 48 people captive, including diplomats, police, consulate employees as well. The International Organization for Migration says 500,000 people have fled Mosul. The latest advancement moves the Sunni militants closer to the capital of Baghdad, just 130 kilometers south of Tikrit. Officials say a major oil refinery between Mosul and Tikrit is still under government control. Gas talks in Brussels between energy representatives of Ukraine and Russia ended without an agreement, as a June 16th deadline looms overhead. The two sides have been locked in talks after Moscow withdrew a natural gas subsidy for Kiev, following the ouster of Ukraine's President Viktor Yanukovych in February. On Wednesday, Russia offered a rate of $100 less its last demanded price for every 1,000 cubic meters of gas exported to Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the discount removed an export duty, bringing it in line with the price paid by other European consumers. Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk said Ukraine would not fall into, quote, Russian traps that changes prices at a whim. A rare exchange of fire was observed between Congolese and Rwandan forces on Wednesday, as both sides accused the other of illegally crossing the volatile border between the two states. Congo pointed at Rwandan forces for instigating the conflict, saying its soldiers crossed over and attacked, kidnapped an army corporal, and later killed him. Rwanda countered by saying its troops reacted to an illegal border crossing by Congolese soldiers. And finally, angry taxi drivers in major European cities united in the largest demonstration yet against rapidly growing car service application Uber. Traffic in London, Paris, Berlin, Madrid, and Barcelona were snarled as cab drivers protested what they said were unlicensed cab services that threatened their livelihood. The San Francisco-based company, which is backed by Goldman Sachs and Google, offers a driver-for-hire service with the touch of an application on users' smartphones.
And a good Thursday morning to you all as we kick things off with the 2014 Brazil World Cup, which is just one day away from its opening ceremony and its first match. Now, despite some protests in the nation, of course, organizers hope for a smooth tournament as Brazil will kick off the tournament with their opening match against Croatia, which will kick off on Thursday, 5 p.m. local time. Now, despite Brazil being the host nation, some experts believe it'll be a tough road ahead for them just by looking at the teams they might have to face if they advance to the next round. And staying with the 2014 Brazil World Cup, it's often difficult to choose which nations will advance out of their group stage, so let's now take a look at some of the key groups you should watch during the World Cup. Of course, taking a look here now, first off, we have Group A to watch with Brazil, Croatia, Mexico, and Cameroon. All of these teams are pretty good teams, so if you think Brazil has an easy draw here, well, you're wrong. Though Mexico did have a hard time qualifying for the World Cup, they're still a good team. Meanwhile, Group B is going to be an interesting one to watch. Why? Only because Spain and Netherlands are in the same group, and it's going to be a great matchup, so don't be surprised if those two nations advance to the next round. And here we go with the first of the two groups of death, Group D. Uruguay, England, Italy, and Costa Rica in the group, and you can bet Costa Rica is going to have a hard time in this group. Who's going to advance? Well, too tough to tell. And of course, last but not least, the other group of death, Group G. There you have Germany, Portugal, Ghana, and the United States, all teams that have what it takes to advance to the next round. But many would agree Germany and Portugal are the favorites in this group. And back here in the nation, the renowned supporter group known as the Red Devils have been waiting 4 years for another chance at cheering for the South Korean national football team. But they can't seem to find a venue this time. With the Sewol-ho ferry memorial site at the Seoul City Hall, the Red Devils have decided they will not use the venue this time. And while the Gwanghwamun Square in central Seoul was the next ideal venue, officials stated that there are safety concerns with having thousands of fans in the area. With the first match taking place at 7 a.m., cheering on the streets might be a problem during the Brazil World Cup. And of course, finishing things off in the KBO, the games at the Jamsil Stadium and Mokdong Stadium in Seoul were canceled due to rain, but the Kia Tigers were able to beat the Hanwha Eagles 9-2, and the Lotte Giants beat the struggling LG Twins 4-1, your final scores. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning, I'm Lee Ji-hyun with your weather updates. Well, it was hailing in some areas in Seoul yesterday. Moderate temperatures, sudden showers, and thunder and lightning have been the theme most of the week, and today's weather is shaped to be a similar one. Mostly to partly sunny skies should give way to thunder and lightning, so keep that umbrella in your bag for the outbreaks of rain today. And with that rain, temperatures will continue to stay on the seasonal averages, hovering in the mid-20s in most areas, and it should be a tad cooler than yesterday. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The morning low here in Seoul is starting out at 19, and the afternoon high will rise to 27, while Daegu and Gwangju should rise to 25 and 26 respectively, and Busan will climb to 21 later in the day. Now for other regions, down on Jeju will peak to 23, Daejeon and Dokdo will rise to 26 and 19, while Mount Gyeongang tops out at 14. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world.
Well, those are the stories we have for you at this hour, but Korea Today is coming up with more news stories in about half an hour's time. We'll be back with Daybreak at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.